on the floor. So we'll keep you up to date on his situation as well as Carolina continues to look to stock talent in any way possible. But now let's put a wrap on what was a up and down 2020-21 season, to say the least. It wasn't as bad as last year. I never came on here and called someone a wounded duck. I never punched the table.
Why do you have to keep referencing that?
Because I will never forget that was.
I just really hope that he does not listen to this podcast.
And hopefully no one got offended by me calling him that. But if they did,
he did. Hey. He's playing well. Where's he at? Is he overseas?
He's not in America. That's all I know.
Hey. He's playing well, though. Stepping up.
And so I got it broken down: non-con season, ACC season, ACC tournament, NCAA tournament, and then the season overall with some talking points. Looking back at the non-conference season, not going to break it down really in depth. Carolina went 5-2 in a shortened non-conference season. They lost to Texas in the Maui Invitational Final on a pretty much a buzzer beater made by, I think it was Jones or Rainey from Texas. And then they lost at Iowa.
No, wasn't it? It was Matt Coleman that hit the game-winning shot. Or it might have been Coleman. Yeah.
Then they lost at Iowa in the ACC Big Ten Challenge. Not considered a bad loss, as Iowa at the time was a top 5 team in the country. Entered the NCAA tournament with Final Four aspirations for getting upset in the second round by Oregon. But they did earn their first regular season win over Kentucky since 2013, having lost to the Wildcats a couple times in Lexington and in the CBS Sports Classic, but they were able to beat them in the CBS Sports Classic this year, therefore earning their first regular season win over them in 8 years. Prior to that, their only win over against Kentucky was 2017 in the regional final, where Luke May hit a well-known buzzer beater to send Carolina back to the Final Four en route to the national championship. Go to the ACC season. We all in the preseason picked this team to finish in the top 3 of the league. They were preseason picked to finish 4th. They overall finished 6th with a 10-6 record. So they finished with a winning record after last year having a program worst 6-14 record. But during that, they had 3 games canceled at home due to COVID. 4 ACC games overall got canceled due to COVID. They started 0-2. Remember, we had those 2 losses to Georgia Tech and NC State. We thought the season was over. The sky was falling. They rebounded, won 7 of 9 before finishing on a 5-4 stretch to get to 10-6 overall. But they did some big things in ACC season as well. They swept Duke for the first time since 2019. I know that's only 2 years removed from that, but they did sweep Duke. And they went undefeated at home for the first time, or in ACC play for the first time in quite some time. Their only home loss this year came to that quirky game against Marquette where they added it last minute to get another game on their resume. Ultimately, that backfired as they got upset by former Marquette head coach who's now been fired, Steve Wojciechowski, in the Smith Center. Move on to the ACC tournament. Carolina beat Notre Dame by 42 to advance to the quarterfinals. Was the second time they beat an ACC team by 40 points or more, joining the thrashing of Louisville a couple weeks prior to that. They then beat Virginia Tech to advance in the semifinals, where they lost a hard-fought, physical game to Florida State in the semis. That game against Florida State in the semis had a championship game type of feel to it. It was very intense. In the Greensboro Coliseum, a very physical game that Carolina didn't make enough plays and ultimately got beat. But we entered the NCAA tournament thinking this team had turned the corner. We thought they were primed to go on some run. Roy Williams had never lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament. We thought they'd play themselves into a 6, more likely a 7th seed. They got seeded 8th in the South. Their 1 seed was going to be Baylor. They didn't get to Baylor. They lost in the first round to Wisconsin in rather blowout fashion. 85-62 was the first loss in the first round for Roy Williams, not only just at Carolina, but in his college basketball career. He's now 29-1 in the first round. It was the largest tournament loss under Roy Williams and the second largest in program history. Overall, this team went 18-11, as I mentioned, 10-6 in the ACC. Armando Bacot led the team in scoring and rebounding with about 12.2 points per game, a little over 8 boards per contest. A rather young team, as we touched on so much during the season, as 7 of their 11 guys were either freshmen or redshirt freshmen. 5 of the 6 incoming freshmen earned ACC honors in some capacity, and during the season, Roy Williams earned his 900th win. And he passed Bob Knight on the all-time wins list as he became the fastest coach to win 900 games. And he's now third in Major I college basketball all-time in wins, counting Jim Calhoun's wins from where he's now coaching in D2. He is currently fourth if you combine both rankings. So we'll get to the talking points of the season. You know, Carolina, even coming off a 14-19 season like they were last year, you brought in the number 2 recruiting class in the country, arguably the best recruiting class under Roy Williams. Expectations entering this season were rather high in Chapel Hill. I've asked many people this, and I haven't really come to the conclusion of the answer myself. Maybe you can kind of persuade me one way or another. Was this season a success for the Tar Heels?
No. Because they lost in the first round of the tournament. We said it when we were talking about this team as they were getting ready to head into the NCAA tournament. To be considered a success, we thought getting to the second round was probably where we were at. And the other reason why I would say you could still justify that was where we were at in the preseason too. We looked at this team, we said, okay, second weekend is probably what we're targeting. If you get to the second round, you'll probably be okay, because we knew that they were probably going to have a pretty difficult matchup, because we figured they would probably be somewhere in between that. We were thinking probably 4 to 6 seed range. That isn't ultimately where they ended up. But at the same time, I do think that, they were pretty close. I'll say that. If they would have won that game against Wisconsin, I would have been willing to consider it a success, especially if they would have came out, played hard, and kept the game close against Baylor. But, at the same time, I still, like I said there, I think it wasn't that close, or it wasn't that far away from being a success. So I think you're close, and you're getting yourself back in the right direction. Now, the thing that really sucks, as we talked about after the season is over, is the fact that you thought you were going to bring back a group that next year would be top 10 preseason, potentially a national title contender if some things broke the right way on your own team and some things broke the right way for the teams and programs that are ahead of you that have built themselves into consistent year in, year out powers like Gonzaga, like Baylor, like Michigan. But I think at the same time, look, even with the guys that you're losing, you still feel pretty confident with the fact that you're getting Caleb Love back. The fact that you're, as we know of, getting R.J. Davis back. The fact that you're getting Kerwin Walton. Your backcourt's coming back. It's going to be the most veteran that it's been in a while. You feel like the transfer portal can probably give you a couple of guys up front, along with the potential that you go and get Jonas Adu to add to your front court maybe. I think that they're not that far away from this season being a success. I think that next year they have a chance to have a season that people will write down as a success, but I would have to say this year I'd have to go with no.
Yeah, I have to go no, too, and this is coming from a guy that my first year watching Carolina basketball through and through, they lost in the Elite Eight. The second year they lost in the Final Four. And the third year, they won a national championship. So my first impression of Carolina basketball was nothing but tournament success. And I think that's where it ultimately lies. Had this team beaten Baylor and made the second round of the tournament, you would deem the season successful because you keep Roy Williams' streak alive. You get some tournament experience. Now, they got some experience this year, but in a bad way and getting blown out. And so I think that's where it all starts and ends with this program. I thought entering the season, if we go back to the very first episode, I thought their ceiling at the most was a Sweet 16 team, and I felt the same way entering the NCAA tournament. Now, I picked them to lose in the second round to Baylor, but had they beat Baylor, I wouldn't have not been all that surprised because they had the capabilities to beat a team like the Baylor Bears, the way they're constructed and the way Carolina is constructed. But we entered that tournament with high expectation, expecting to win the first round game. After the way they closed the season, mainly we felt so confident after they had a good showing in Greensboro. And I mentioned on here during that, I don't put a lot of value in winning the ACC tournament. I put a lot of value in playing well in the ACC tournament before you get to the big dance. And I thought Carolina played really well in their 3 games in Greensboro. That success didn't translate when they went up to Indianapolis and took on Wisconsin, ending Roy Williams' historic streak. And I think it was just the way that they got beat, where once they kind of got out of it, all year long they had kind of punched teams back in the mouth and made runs and made games competitive. That was the first time all year where we could look at that team and just say they don't have that in them tonight. maybe they're mentally exhausted, they're physically exhausted because it's been a trying season. None of us will never know what those kids went through playing college basketball in a bubble during a pandemic. And so I think for that's why it's not labeled a success for me. If you look at some other things, you took a step in the right direction. You rebounded with your ACC standing. Last year, you finished last. You were seeded 15th in the ACC tournament. This year, you're seeded 6th. You had a winning record. You were undefeated at home in conference play. You swept Duke. You took a lot of steps in the right direction, but none of that really matters once you get into March. That's what you're all graded on, and they didn't grade out very well with that NCAA tournament result. A big thing that's come out since the season ended is the fact that the season has ended 4 straight years in blowout fashion. 3 of those losses happening in the NCAA tournament. Texas A&M blew them out in the second round in 2018. Auburn blew them out in the Sweet 16 in 2019. And then Wisconsin blew them out this year in 2021. You squeeze that in between last year's blowout loss to Syracuse in the ACC tournament that concluded their season before COVID shut everything down. That's 4 straight years Carolina has not went out the right way. Not meaning you never go out the right way unless you win the national championship. But even before that, you look at where this team had lost in the NCAA tournament, they were either in the second weekend of the tournament or they were at least competitive. Carolina hasn't been competitive when they've gotten their season ended. What does this ultimately mean?
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know how much to actually put into that because, I mean, I understand that some people might look at it and say maybe Roy's just losing his touch in the tournament or whatever. I don't know. I don't know what that mindset really is because I'm not in that mindset. But I don't know. I think, to be honest with you, it was just 3 really bad matchups in the tournament for these teams. You look at Texas A&M, that team, you talked about this, and I believe in the last podcast. People want to go guard-oriented. That team was guard-oriented. That team got destroyed inside by a Texas A&M team that played with 2 bigs. That's the reason they got beat in that game. 2019 against Auburn, that was more, they just ran into one of the hottest teams in the tournament. I mean, that Auburn team should have made the national championship game. They got screwed on a bad call against Virginia, or else they're playing for a national title. That was just one where you ran into a buzzsaw, a guy that was really just coaching his heart out, Bruce Pearl, to try to make a run and get himself a national championship. And then this year, I think, again, we were talking about it when we were previewing that game, that this was a tough matchup. A veteran team that, had some guys that could shoot the ball. And what happened? It was exactly what we thought was going to happen if the worst case scenario came true. They had guys that took care of the basketball, did what they had to do as veterans, and they had a guard in Brad Davison who went nuts. He hit literally everything that he looked at. The kid could not miss. So, I mean, I don't know how much to read into it. I think if you get a matchup that you like in the tournament going forward, and it happens to you again and you get blown out, then maybe you can be a little bit concerned. I think the biggest thing is, like this year, I'm not reading into it all that much because, again, you were coming off a pretty difficult season the year before. This was a COVID-19 season where nothing was the same, so it was still very strange, and you were a very young team. If that happens next year, especially if this is a team that can become, what we think they can become, which at this point, I guess we're dialing it back. I'd still probably have them anywhere from a 3 seed in the tournament to a 6 seed. If you come out and get beat by a team that we think you match up really well against, and you're looking like you're going to have a chance to make a run and don't, then I think we can start to get a little concerned about that. But right now, I'm not reading too much into it.
Right.
I mean, especially, like I said, the Auburn loss, I think people really want to read into that a lot. And it's like, dude, that team could have won a national championship. They were playing that good. They got a bad foul call on them that kept them out of the national championship.
When you look at the 3 tournament losses, the only one that's really dumbfounding or really is stunning is how bad that team went out in 2018. That team entered the tournament as a 2 seed. Their draw to make the Final Four was easier than the previous 2 years where Carolina made the Final Four.
Yeah, that was the one time we felt extremely confident with the draw, and it didn't work out.
That was a team that had what you need to have to win in March. You had a veteran guard in Joel Berry, who was the reigning Final Four most outstanding player. You had Theo Pinson, who was a wild card. I think if you go back to that team when you had Cam Johnson, you had in 2019,